Harlem, New York, Saturday, August 9, 1930. 1:17 a.m. The rain didn't fall like water. It fell like a warning. It turned Lenox Avenue into black glass, reflecting street lamps like dying stars. Men moved fast between doorways, shoulders hunched, collars up, because in Harlem, at this hour, you didn't walk slow unless you wanted someone to notice you. And tonight, somebody wanted Bumpy Johnson noticed. Inside a back room number spot above a barber shop, the air smelled like damp wool and hot ink. The room was quiet except for one sound: a pencil scratching paper. Bumpy sat at the table, 25 years old, suit crisp, face calm. He didn't look up when the door opened, because he already knew who it would be. A runner. Skinny kid named Calvin Pope, barely 19. Harlem-born. Quick feet, good instincts, and terrified. Calvin stepped inside like the room was a courtroom and he was guilty. His hands shook as he removed his cap, water dripping onto the floor. Behind Bumpy, two men stiffened. One reached under his coat. Bumpy raised one finger. "Stop." Calvin swallowed. "Mr. Johnson, I was told. I gotta give you this. Only you." Bumpy finally looked up. His eyes weren't angry. They were measuring. "Who told you?" Bumpy asked. Calvin hesitated, then whispered it. "A man from Chicago." That word hit the room like a gun cocking. Chicago. Bumpy leaned back slightly, slow and controlled, like a man preparing for a storm he could already smell. "Put it on the table," he said. Calvin walked forward and placed a small object beside the cash stacks. Not a letter, not money. A white rose. Fresh, perfect, wrong for Harlem. And wrapped around the stem was a folded slip of paper held by a thin gold band. Bumpy didn't touch it. He stared at it like it was alive, because everybody in the room knew the story now. In Chicago, a white rose wasn't romance. It was Al Capone's handwriting. Calvin took a nervous breath. He said if I didn't deliver it, he'd. Bumpy cut him off. "Go home, Calvin." Calvin blinked. "Sir?" I said, "Go home." Bumpy nodded toward the door. "And don't take the same route twice." Calvin didn't argue. He turned and fled down the stairs, almost slipping on the wet wood like the devil was behind him. When the door shut again, the room stayed silent for 3 full seconds. Then one of Bumpy's men, Three-Finger Leon, muttered, "That ain't just a message. That's an insult. That rose is Capone saying he can reach in Harlem whenever he wants." Bumpy still didn't move. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a clean handkerchief, and only then, using the cloth, he picked up the rose like it might carry poison. He removed the paper, unfolded it. One line, just one. But it felt like a full invasion. Bumpy's eyes tracked the words, and for the first time that night, a flicker of heat crossed his face. Leon leaned forward. "What'd it say?" Bumpy read it out loud, calm as a priest. "A gift for Harlem. You're welcome. Now show respect. Al Capone. A gift for Harlem." That meant something had already happened, and suddenly the whole room understood the real danger. Capone didn't send this rose to start a conversation. He sent it to announce ownership. Bumpy stood up. He walked to the window and looked down at Lenox Avenue rain, streetlight, shadows. Then he turned back to the table and stared at the rose like it was laughing at him. Leon whispered, "Boss, what you want us to do?" Bumpy didn't shout, didn't pace, didn't threaten. He only said one sentence quiet enough that it felt personal. "Get me the name of the Chicago man who handed that rose to Calvin." Leon nodded quickly. "And then?" Bumpy's gaze hardened. "Then we send Capone an answer." He paused, eyes cold, not with words. Bumpy picked up the gold band that held the message and snapped it in half. The sound was small, but everyone in that room heard what it meant. Because in Harlem, snapping a man's message wasn't refusing a deal. It was declaring war. And the most frightening part? Bumpy still hadn't asked the real question out loud. What exactly did Capone already do in Harlem that he called it a gift? Harlem, New York, Saturday, August 9th, 1930. 2:06 a.m. Calvin Pope ran like the rain was chasing him. He kept his head down, footsteps slapping puddles, lungs burning. He didn't look behind him not once because he'd grown up in Harlem long enough to understand something simple. You don't deliver a message from Al Capone to Bumpy Johnson and walk away clean. Not unless God personally escorts you home. Calvin cut through an alley behind a closed fish market, then through a narrow passage where the trash cans smelled like rot and beer. His heart hammered like somebody was knocking from inside his chest. He wasn't scared of Bumpy. He was scared of what Bumpy represented. If Bumpy thought Calvin had anything to do with Capone's move, Calvin wouldn't even get a funeral. And if Capone believed Calvin talked too much, then Calvin's mother would be identifying him by a shoe. That was the knife pressed against his neck from both sides. When Calvin reached his building, he stopped at the front steps, soaked and shaking. He didn't go in right away. He listened. Silence. No strange footsteps. No car engine idling. Then he climbed the stairs, 2 at a time. Inside, the apartment was dark except for the stove light glowing faint orange. His mother, Lena Pope, sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, waiting like she'd been awake for hours. She was 38 but looked older. Harlem had a way of doing that. Her fingers were stained from sewing work. Her eyes were sharp in a way Calvin hated, because she could read him without a word. She looked him up and down. "Where were you?" Calvin tried to breathe normal. "Work." "At 1 in the morning?" Calvin's throat tightened. "It ain't like that." Lena stood, walked over and touched his wet coat. She didn't yank him or hit him. She didn't have to. Her voice was quiet. "You're shaking." Calvin finally broke. "Ma, don't ask me nothin', please." That's when Lena's face changed. Not fear, anger. The kind of anger mothers get when they realize the world is trying to swallow their child whole. "Calvin Pope," she said slowly, "I already buried 1 man in this city. I am not burying my son too." Calvin's eyes flashed. "You think I want this?" Lena pointed at the window. "Then stop running around with men who carry guns and secrets." Calvin laughed without humor. "Ma, I run errands." "That's it. I carry paper, cigarettes, drinks." Lena stepped closer. "You were drenched like you ran from death." Calvin's lips trembled, and Lena saw at the exact second he failed to hide it. Her voice softened. "Who sent you?" Calvin tried to hold it back, but the name came out like poison. "Chicago." Lena froze. For a moment, the air in the apartment turned heavy. She didn't ask which man. In Harlem, Chicago only meant one thing. Lena whispered, "Capone." Calvin didn't answer. He didn't need to. Lena stared at her son like she was watching him stand on train tracks. Then she moved fast opened a drawer, pulled out a small cloth bag. Inside was money she'd been hiding for months, folded tight like prayers. "What you doing?" Calvin asked. Lena shoved the bag into his hands. "You're leaving." Calvin blinked. "Mo tonight." Calvin's voice cracked. "I can't just disappear. They'll know." Lena grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steel. "Listen to me. Men like Capone, men like Bumpy, they don't see you as a boy. They see you as a door. And once you become a door, everybody kicks you open." Calvin pulled away. "Bumpy told me go home." "That don't mean you're safe," Lena snapped. "That means he's deciding what to do with you." Calvin's stomach dropped, because deep down, he knew she was right. Lena lowered her voice. "What did you carry?" Calvin swallowed hard. He looked toward the floor as if the truth might crawl up his legs. "A white rose," he said, "and a note." Lena covered her mouth. Calvin whispered, "Ma, I think Capone already did something in Harlem. That's why he sent it. He marking territory." Lena backed up slowly, as if the walls were collapsing. Then she said a sentence that made Calvin feel colder than the rain ever could. "Your cousin Eli didn't come home tonight." Calvin looked up sharply. "Eli?" Lena nodded, voice shaking now. "He went to check on Mr. Casati's store after closing. Said he'd be 10 minutes. It's been 4 hours. Calvin's breath caught, because Mr. Casati's store wasn't just a store. It was one of the quiet Harlem fronts where Bumpy's numbers money passed through. And Eli Pep, Calvin's older cousin, 22, worked there on nights. Calvin stared at his mother, and in his mind the pieces began to connect. Capone's rose. Capone's gift. Eli missing. Calvin's voice came out like a whisper. Ma, I think Eli is the gift. And somewhere across Harlem, in the wet shadows of Lenox Avenue, Bumpy Johnson was already asking the same question. Harlem, New York, Saturday, August 9th, 1930, 3:11 a.m. Bumpy didn't sleep, not when Chicago sent roses. He stood in the back room of the numbers spot with his coat still on, watching the rain bleed down the window like the city was crying in secret. The rose sat in a glass on the table, kept alive like an insult that refused to die. Across from him, Three-Finger Leon laid out information like cards in a crooked poker game. Casati's store got hit, Leon said. Back door pried open. Cash drawer empty. And somebody scrubbed the floor, like they didn't want blood seen. Bumpy's jaw tightened. Scrubbed floors don't erase deaths. Leon nodded. That's what worries me. Bumpy turned. Who was on that corner tonight? Leon hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Say it, Bumpy ordered. Leon cleared his throat. Eli Pope. Bumpy's eyes narrowed. Calvin Pope's cousin? Yes. For a moment, Bumpy didn't speak. Not because he didn't know what to do, because he did. He knew exactly what Chicago was doing. They weren't just sending muscle. They were sending fear. They were reaching into Harlem and proving they could take a Harlem boy off a Harlem corner without asking permission. That was the gift. Bumpy looked at Leon. Where's Calvin? Leon answered quick. Home. Like you told him. Bumpy stared at him. You sure? Leon swallowed. We had eyes on him. Nobody followed. Bumpy's voice dropped. Keep eyes anyway. Because Bumpy understood something most men never learned until it was too late. When you become the center of a war, even the innocent become leverage. He turned back to the table and pointed at the note from Capone. Who brought the rose? Leon replied. A Chicago man. Skinny, hat low. Stayed in the shadows. Passed it to Calvin, then disappeared. Bumpy's tone sharpened. Name. Leon finally said it. They calling him Vince Satin Moretti. He'd been seen at the train station twice this week. Bumpy's eyes hardened. That was what he needed. He walked to a cabinet, opened it, pulled out a small ledger. Not numbers, not money, names, roots, loyalty, weakness. He flipped to the page marked Docs and tapped the paper. This Moretti ain't just a messenger, Bumpy said. He's scouting. Leon leaned in. So what's the move? Bumpy's answer came like a gunshot without the noise. We find him first. Across Harlem, Calvin Pope couldn't breathe properly. His mother's apartment felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in to trap him inside a mistake. Lena paced the kitchen while Calvin sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cloth bag of money like it was too heavy to touch. Put on dry clothes, Lena ordered. Calvin shook his head. Ma, it don't matter. If they want me, they'll get me. Lena's eyes flashed. Then we make it harder, Calvin whispered. Eli gone. Lena stopped pacing. Her face looked like it cracked. She spoke softly. Maybe he ran. Maybe he's hiding. Calvin didn't answer. Because they both knew Eli wasn't the kind of man who disappeared without telling his mother. Calvin stood up slowly. I'm going to Casati's. Lena grabbed his arm. No. Calvin pulled away. Ma, he my blood. Blood gets spilled, Lena snapped. Then her voice broke. I can't lose both of you. Calvin looked at her and made a choice right there, one that wasn't smart, but was human. I'll just look, he said. I'll be back before sunrise. Lena stared at him like she was watching him walk toward a cliff. Then she whispered, if you go out that door, you don't speak to nobody. You don't trust nobody. Not even your friends. Calvin frowned. Why? Lena's mouth tightened. Because people get bought. And when money ain't enough, fear does the rest. Harlem, 3:49 a.m. Calvin moved through side streets, hood up, avoiding light. He reached Casati's store and froze. The street was too quiet. The back door was half open, like somebody left it that way on purpose. Calvin stepped closer, heart pounding. Then he heard something, a faint shuffle, a breathing sound that didn't belong to the night. Calvin whispered, Eli. No answer. He pushed the door wider and slipped inside. The store smelled wrong, like wet wood and bleach. Someone had cleaned. A lot. Calvin's eyes adjusted slowly, and then he saw it. A scrap of Eli's jacket caught under the counter, torn hard like someone dragged him. Calvin's stomach turned. He bent down, fingers trembling, and touched the cloth. That's when the floorboard behind him creaked. Calvin spun and a hand clamped over his mouth from the darkness. A voice pressed into his ear, Italian accent, smooth as oil. "Easy," the voice said. "I've been waiting for you." Calvin's eyes went wide, because he recognized that voice from the streets. Not Bumpy's, not Harlem's, Chicago's. And in the dim light, a man stepped forward, thin, well-dressed, hat tilted low, smile cold. Vince Satin Moretti. He leaned in close. "You deliver Capone's message," Moretti whispered. "And now you deliver the reply." Calvin tried to scream, but the hand over his mouth tightened. Moretti's smile widened as if he'd caught a fish. And outside, rain kept falling soft and steady like the city didn't care who disappeared next. Harlem, New York, Saturday, August 9th, 1930. 4:03 a.m. Calvin Pope couldn't scream. Moretti's hand crushed his mouth shut, fingers digging into his cheeks like claws. Calvin's nails scraped at the wrist, desperate, useless. Vince Satin Moretti leaned in, calm as a man ordering coffee. "You don't fight," Moretti whispered. "You breathe, you nod, you live." Calvin's eyes darted around Casati's store. The shelves were still canned beans, flour sacks, soap, ordinary things. But the air smelled like bleach and fear. Moretti tilted his head toward the back room. "Walk." Calvin tried to shake his head. Moretti pressed something cold against Calvin's ribs. Metal. Not a full gun. Smaller. A snub-nose revolver. "You want your mother to bury you," Moretti murmured. "Or you want to see daylight again?" Calvin went still. The name hit him like a slap. Mother. Moretti already knew. That meant Calvin wasn't just a random courier anymore. He was a target file. Calvin's legs moved on their own. Step by step, he crossed the store, pushed through the curtain into the back room. And there, under a single hanging bulb, Calvin saw what gift really meant. A chair, a rope, and Eli Pope, tied up, head hanging, face swollen, one eye nearly shut. Alive. Barely. Calvin's throat tried to make a sound. Eli lifted his head slowly, like it weighed 100 pounds. His lips were split. Blood crusted his chin. When Eli recognized Calvin, his good eye widened in terror. He shook his head. "No, no, no." Moretti's voice stayed smooth. "Family reunion. Beautiful." Calvin's whole body trembled. Why you doing this?" Moretti smiled like the question entertained him. "Because Capone believes in messages," he said. "And you are a fine envelope." Moretti walked behind Eli and placed a hand on his shoulder, almost affectionate. "This one," he continued, "guarded a little Harlem store. Thought he was protecting something important." He leaned closer to Calvin. "Heave us." Calvin's eyes flashed. "Eli didn't do nothing." Moretti shrugged. "That's why it's perfect. Nobody cares about guilty. They care about loud." Then Moretti reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully and placed it on the table under the bulb. A gold ring, a thin gold band, broken. Calvin recognized it instantly. The band from the rose. Bumpy had snapped it. Moretti tapped it once with his finger, like a judge. "Mr. Johnson snapped Capone's message," Moretti said softly. "Capone doesn't like being snapped." Eli struggled, muffled moan in his throat. Calvin stepped forward instinctively. Moretti lifted the revolver slightly. "Stay." Calvin froze. Moretti's smile faded. "Now here's the part you'll enjoy, Calvin." Calvin whispered. "I won't enjoy nothing." Moretti leaned in, cold eyes shining. "You are going to walk back to Bumpy Johnson." Calvin's breath hitched. Moretti continued. "You're going to tell him Eli is alive. You're going to tell him Chicago is open for business." Calvin shook his head violently. Moretti cut him off. "You're also going to tell Bumpy something else." He stepped closer until Calvin could smell his cologne, expensive, wrong for Harlem. "You're going to tell him," Moretti whispered, "that he has exactly 1 hour to send a reply." Calvin stared. A reply? Moretti nodded. A man. A name. A piece. Calvin swallowed hard. What piece? Moretti turned and nodded toward Eli. Your cousin is the clock. Calvin's stomach dropped. Moretti leaned closer, voice gentle as poison. If Bumpy wants him alive, he sends Capone something worth more than a rose. Calvin's voice cracked. Bumpy ain't gonna do that. Moretti smiled. 10 LEDs. Eli made a strangled sound, shaking his head again. Calvin's eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall. He whispered, You think Bumpy scared? Moretti's smile widened. Not scared. Proud. That's worse. Proud men choose graves over bending. Then Moretti reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. He shoved it into Calvin's hand. Here, he said. That's your script. Calvin looked down. Only 2 lines. 1 hour. 1 man, or the boy dies. Under it, a location. The basement of St. Cecilia's church. Calvin blinked. Church? Moretti's eyes glinted. Capone likes irony. Calvin looked up. What if I don't go? Moretti's face turned flat. Then your mother gets Eli's body on her doorstep, and you get yours beside it. Calvin's hands shook. Moretti leaned close one last time. And Calvin, he whispered, Bumpy's men? They already know you delivered Capone's rose. Calvin's blood ran cold. Moretti smiled. They might think you're the one who sold Eli out. That sentence landed like a coffin lid. Because Calvin suddenly understood the trap wasn't just Chicago's gun. It was Harlem's suspicion. Moretti stepped back. Now run along. Time is moving. He nodded toward the door. Calvin didn't move. Not until Eli suddenly lifted his head and rasped through swollen lips. Cow, Eli whispered, voice broken. Don't. Trust. Moretti slapped Eli hard across the face. The sound cracked in the small room like thunder. Eli's head dropped again. Calvin flinched, but he didn't rush. Because he couldn't. Moretti tilted the gun toward Calvin. Go. Calvin backed out, stumbled through the curtain, into the main store. He ran into the rain. Harlem, 4:26 a.m. Calvin sprinted through streets that looked asleep, but weren't. Harlem never truly slept, it just closed its eyes and listened. Behind closed curtains, men watched. Across corners, shadows shifted. Calvin could feel them. Bumpy's watchers. Harlem eyes. And the worst part? Moretti was right. If Bumpy believed Calvin was compromised, Calvin would die before he even spoke. He reached Bumpy's numbers spot, slammed into the stairs, burst into the room. Leon and 2 other men snapped up, guns coming out. Hold, Calvin gasped. Hold, I gotta. Leon's face tightened as if he'd been waiting for this. You went to Casati's, Leon said. Calvin froze. How? Leon stepped closer, gun aimed. Why would you go to Casati's if you wasn't part of it? Calvin's heart fell through the floor. He tried to explain, words tumbling. Eli missing my ma said I only went to look. Leon's eyes stayed hard. Or you went to check on your Chicago friends. Calvin shook his head. No. They got Eli. They got him right now. The room went tense. Then Bumpy's voice came from the back, quiet, sharp. Let him talk. Bumpy stepped forward. Coat on. Eyes locked to Calvin like a blade. Calvin's throat worked. He forced the words out. Chicago man. Vince Moretti. He grabbed me. He got Eli in Casati's back room. He said Capone wants a reply. Calvin held out the paper with shaking hands. Bumpy took it slowly, read it once. No emotion. Then he read it again, and something changed behind his eyes, not rage. Calculation. Because Bumpy saw the twist instantly. This wasn't just kidnapping. This was a test. Capone wanted to see if Harlem could be forced to trade its own people. If Bumpy would hand over a man. Bumpy folded the paper neatly and looked at Leon. Who was watching Calvin? Bumpy asked. Leon hesitated. 2 boys. They lost him for a minute in the alley. Bumpy stared at him. That stare felt like punishment. Then Bumpy turned back to Calvin, voice low. Listen to me, Bumpy said. You're going to do exactly what I tell you. Calvin nodded fast, desperate. Bumpy stepped closer until their faces were inches apart. Capone thinks you're my weakness, Bumpy said. You're not. Calvin swallowed. Then what am I? Bumpy's answer hit like a gunshot with no sound. You're my bait. Calvin's eyes widened. Bumpy turned to his men. Get dressed. Quiet. No shooting unless I say. Leon blinked. Boss. St. Cecilia's Church. Bumpy cut him off. We're not going to St. Cecilia's. Leon froze. Then where? Bumpy's voice dropped to a whisper. We're going to Casati's. He looked at Calvin again. And we're going to bring Eli back. While Capone's messenger is still smiling, Calvin trembled. What if Moretti kills him? Bumpy's face stayed calm, but his eyes were cold enough to freeze blood. That's the war, Bumpy said. Then he added the sentence that changed everything, the sentence that made every man in that room understand they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. If Capone wants a man as a reply, Bumpy buttoned his coat. Then I'm going to send him one. Not alive. Harlem, New York, Saturday, August 9th, 1930. 5:02 a.m. Casati's store looked peaceful from the outside. A closed sign. A wet sidewalk. Rain dripping off the awning like normal life still existed. But Bumpy knew better. He didn't storm the place. He didn't kick the door in. He circled it like a hunter, slow, silent, deliberate. Leon and two men stayed on the front corner, pretending to smoke. Another pair slipped into the alley behind the fish market, watching the back exit. And Calvin stood across the street under a doorway, shaking so hard he could barely stay upright. Bumpy walked up to him and spoke quietly, not unkind but final. Look at me. Calvin forced his eyes up. Bumpy said, if you panic, Eli dies. If you move wrong, you die. You understand? Calvin nodded, breath ragged. Bumpy tapped his chest once. Be still. Then he turned away and disappeared into the rain. Inside Casati's, the smell of bleach still hung in the air. Moretti was in the back room with Eli, calm, patient, like he had all morning. He thought the hour was his weapon. He didn't know time belonged to Harlem. Bumpy entered through the back like a shadow with lungs. No footsteps, no noise. He moved with Leon's smallest man, Skinny Ray, who carried a short blade and a nervous prayer. Bumpy stopped at the curtain, listened. Eli's faint breathing, Moretti's low humming. Bumpy nodded once. Skinny Ray slid forward and pulled the curtain open, and Bumpy stepped in. Moretti spun fast, gun rising, but Bumpy was already there. One hand grabbed the revolver barrel and shoved it upward. The shot exploded into the ceiling, plaster dust raining down. Eli flinched hard. Moretti tried to pull back. Bumpy drove his elbow into Moretti's throat. Moretti choked, stumbled, eyes bulging. Then Bumpy hit him again, short, brutal, right into the jaw. Moretti collapsed to his knees. Skinny Ray rushed to Eli, cutting the rope, whispering, "We got you, we got you." Eli fell forward, coughing, half dead but alive. Moretti tried to crawl for the gun. Bumpy stepped on his hand. Bones cracked. Moretti screamed. Bumpy crouched, grabbed him by the hair, and forced his face up into the hanging light. Moretti's confidence was gone now. What was left was panic. He rasped, Capone. Bumpy's voice was quiet. I know what Capone will do. Then he leaned in close. So close Moretti could smell Harlem on him. You came here thinking you were the mouth, Bumpy said, but you're the message. Moretti's eyes widened. Wait. Bumpy turned his head slightly toward Leon's man. Bring the rose, Bumpy ordered. Skinny Ray, trembling, pulled the white rose from inside his coat, kept dry, kept perfect. Bumpy took it and held it in front of Moretti's face. You see this? Bumpy asked. Moretti couldn't speak. Bumpy continued, cold and steady. Capone sent this to tell me Harlem is his. Bumpy raised the rose and jammed the stem into Moretti's mouth, forcing it in until Moretti gagged and choked, eyes watering in horror. Bumpy grabbed the revolver from the floor. Moretti shook his head violently. Desperate. Bumpy didn't flinch. One shot. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Moretti's body slumped sideways like a marionette with its strings cut. And in that same moment, Eli, still barely standing, looked at his cousin Calvin through the doorway, eyes glassy with shock. Because Calvin was there now, pulled in by the noise. He saw the blood. He saw the rose. He saw what Bumpy had done. And Calvin realized something terrifying. Bumpy hadn't saved Eli to end the war. He saved Eli so Harlem could survive it. Bumpy wiped the gun, stood up, and gave the order that turned one death into a citywide consequence. "Wrap him," Bumpy said. Leon swallowed. "Where we sending him?" Bumpy looked down at Moretti's corpse with the rose still shoved between his teeth. Then he answered with ice in his voice. "To Chicago. Harlem, New York, Saturday, August 9th, 1930. 6:21 a.m. By sunrise, Harlem had already heard. Not the full story. Not names and details. But the truth always moved faster than proof. A Chicago man came to Harlem. A Harlem man answered. And somebody's body was about to travel west. Eli Pope lay on a cot in the back of Bumpy's numbers spot, wrapped in blankets, face swollen, breathing shallow. Lena Pope sat beside him with her sewing hands gripping his wrist like she could stitch life back into him. Calvin stood in the corner, soaked in guilt. He kept replaying Moretti's voice in his head, "They might think you sold Eli out." Now he understood the deeper cruelty. Capone didn't just want a hostage. He wanted Harlem to turn on itself. Bumpy stepped into the room and looked at Calvin. Not angry, not soft, just exact. "You did what you could," Bumpy said. Calvin's eyes flashed. "I got him took," Bumpy replied. "Chicago took him." "You just brought the paper." Calvin swallowed, shaking. "They still gonna blame me." Bumpy nodded once. "Some will." Calvin's throat tightened. "Then what do I do?" Bumpy's answer wasn't comforting. "It was a job. You stop running," Bumpy said. "You stand where I tell you. You live long enough for them to see you ain't Chicago's." Calvin stared at him, confused. "Why you care if I live?" Bumpy leaned in, voice low. "Because Capone tried to use your family to teach Harlem a lesson." He tapped Calvin's chest lightly. "If you survive, you teach Chicago a lesson back." That hit Calvin like a weight. Because he wasn't a courier anymore. He was part of the war whether he wanted it or not. Across town, in a quiet garage behind a cab depot, Leon and two men worked without speaking. They washed the blood off Moretti's face, dressed him in clean clothes, and arranged him like a passenger. Then Leon opened a small wooden box and pulled out a fresh white rose. He hesitated. Even Leon didn't like touching symbols. But he placed the rose carefully in Moretti's coat pocket, stem angled upward like a badge, and taped a simple note to his chest. "Harlem received your gift." No signature, no flourish. Because the body itself signed it. They loaded Moretti into the trunk of a black sedan and drove south toward the docks, where a freight route could move a package to Chicago without questions. Harlem had its own pipeline, same as Capone. Chicago, Monday, August 11th, 1930, 9:14 a.m. p.m. When the body finally arrived, it didn't go to a police station. It went to a private garage behind an Italian social club. Capone's men opened the trunk, and silence filled the room. Moretti's face was pale, his mouth still twisted like he died begging, and tucked into his coat, the white rose. One of Capone's men cursed under his breath. Another turned and ran to get the boss. Minutes later, Capone walked in heavy steps, cigar in hand, expression relaxed like nothing in the world could surprise him. Then he saw the body. He stared for a long moment. His smile didn't fade. It sharpened. He leaned down, plucked the note off Moretti's chest, and read it. Capone's eyes lifted slowly, and the room felt colder. Because every man there knew what that meant. Bumpy Johnson didn't just reject Chicago. He sent Chicago its own symbol back stuffed in the mouth of a dead messenger. Capone took the cigar out of his mouth, exhaled once, and said quietly, "Harlem thinks it's brave." He turned to his top enforcer. "Get me names," Capone ordered. "Roots. Families. Anybody who eats because Bumpy lets them." Then Capone added the line that made the war official not in Harlem, not in rumors but in blood. "I don't want Bumpy first." A few men blinked, confused. Capone smiled again. "I want his streets to beg him to surrender." Harlem, New York, Friday, August 22nd, 1930, 11:53 a.m. p.m. 2 weeks later, Harlem was quieter, not peaceful. Just quieter, like a neighborhood holding its breath. Bootleg trucks started avoiding certain blocks. Numbers runners stopped walking alone. Club owners who used to smile at Bumpy now looked past him like eye contact might get them killed. Because Capone didn't attack Bumpy directly. He attacked Harlem's confidence. That night, Calvin Pope stood outside a small jazz club on 133rd Street, wearing a borrowed coat and a nervous face he couldn't hide. He wasn't there to have fun. He was there because Bumpy told him to stand there, to be seen, to prove he wasn't afraid. A black sedan rolled by slowly, too slow to be normal. Calvin felt his throat tighten. The car didn't stop. It kept going. Then, 20 seconds later, the club's front windows exploded outward. Gunfire ripped through the entrance like a storm of nails. Screams burst into the street. People stampeded, slipping in rain, tripping over bodies. Calvin hit the ground, hands over his head. When the shooting stopped, the sedan was gone. And inside the club, a singer lay bleeding on the floor. Mabel Wynn, 26, pregnant, and engaged to a man who ran Bumpy's numbers on that block. She hadn't been part of anything. She hadn't delivered messages. She hadn't snapped gold bands. She was just close enough. Bumpy arrived minutes later, pushing through the chaos. He saw the blood. He saw the shattered glass. He saw Mabel's fiancé screaming her name like it could wake her back up. And for the first time in this whole war, Bumpy's face showed pain, because this wasn't about him anymore. Capone had found the one reply Bumpy couldn't send back in a trunk: innocent loss. Bumpy turned away from the club and looked down the street where the sedan had vanished. And he whispered more to himself than anyone else. So that's how you want it. Because now Bumpy understood the price. Winning wouldn't make him a legend. Winning would make him a man Harlem might never forgive. And the war didn't begin with a rose. It began with one lesson Chicago wanted Harlem to learn. Sometimes, the message isn't written to the boss. It's written to everyone who depends on him. If you want part 2 of this war where Bumpy strikes back in a way Capone never predicts, subscribe. Because the next move doesn't come from a gunman. It comes from a name on a ledger.